start now. I'm glad to have you again, and this time we're going to talk about Genghis Khan and his successors. What we know about Genghis Khan from primary sources, and how many of primary sources dealt with Genghis Khan in 13th century and 12th century, because he was a person who lived in 12th and 13th centuries.
Well, I don't know the exact number because he was an international global phenomenon. There's so many different sources in the 1200s, but there's a few that are really, in my view, important. And I don't know how much importance other historians always place on this, but I always like to get the earliest sources about something because that's where this sort of there hasn't been time to formulate a narrative. Sort of like if you arrived right on the scene when something happened and you interviewed someone, you could get a very different story than years after when they can look back on it and formulate a sort of agreed upon story. So there are a few sources that really stand out because they're early and they're written in the lifetime of Genghis Khan, who died in 1227. But a lot of our sources come after 1227. They come they were written down in the lives of his grandsons, etc., or his son Ogadiah when he was reigning on the throne. So it's been too long to be completely sure that those sources are giving you the straight goods, so to speak. But there's some very early sources, and one of them is the Mangda Beilu, which was written in 1221 by a Chinese official who went up to Beijing and he met with the Mongols leadership there. And so he has a story about well, details about Genghis Khan from his own lifetime, and they're quite different from what you're going to get from around the year 1300, etc. Um, in the official Mongol historiography from the late 1200s to the 1300s, they say that Genghis Khan was a Mongol and his people were Mongols and that they were fighting against the Tatars. But this Mengda Beilu in 1221 reports, quote, the present Emperor Chinggis and his generals and great ministers are all black Tatars, end quote. So you're not supposed to, the Tatars are supposedly Chinggis Khan's enemies in the around the year 1300, but in this early source from his lifetime by a Chinese government official who's just reporting on what he's seen in the Mongol Empire. He says that Chinggis Khan and all his people are black Tatars, and then he also says the Tatars are not very tall, maybe 5 foot 3 or 4 inches, and they're thin. But he says the Tatar lord Temujin, that's Chinggis Khan's real name, differs in that he is of a noble bearing with a broad forehead and long whiskers, and he cuts a heroic, robust figure. So, according to this official, Chinggis Khan kind of stood out amongst his followers as a big, strong, Herculean sort of figure. And this Mengda Beilu, this very early source, reports something else very, very strange compared to the official sources of how we remember Genghis Khan. The official sources from like the late 1200s, 1300s, they tell us that he was the son of a kind of line of kings. But this early report from 1221 says, now called Chinggis, Temujin is the son of the Paisa chief Gelu, a Paisa chief in this country, Mongolia, being the chief of 10 men. As he's now the lord who established the kingdom, so borrowing the title, they call him Emperor Chinggis. With his campaigns to the east and his conquests to the west, his country has become very powerful. One of the earliest sources we have from his own lifetime, a Chinese official who's not writing a history, he's just writing a government report on what he's seen. He says, Chinggis Khan's the son of a chief of 10 men, and now he's the emperor of the East and West. which is strange because we're supposed to think that his father was a king and his grandfather and great grandfathers through the ages. You know, they were always fighting the Jin dynasty and the Chinese emperor. But from his own lifetime comes this report that no, his father's the chief of 10 men. Then we have Jews Jani, who was writing in the 1220s as well in India, and he describes Chinggis Khan during his own lifetime. And he just keeps saying that Chinggis Khan was perceived as brave, intrepid. He had a very he had cat's eyes. He said, kind of striking looking eyes, and gray hair already when he saw him. He said he's a harsh lawgiver, or when people from that region saw Chinggis Khan, he's already an elderly guy in the 1220s. But he'll often mention he's a lawgiver, and how Chinggis Khan would just enforce the law and get the obedience of people, kind of persuade them that they have to obey him in all things. And you'll see this in different sources around the world, in Europe, etc. But Juzjani was very early to report how Chinggis Khan controlled people. And he also described another very strange thing about Chinggis Khan. Juzjani said that he would go into religious trances, sort of before a war. So before his war against the Jin dynasty in China, Chinggis Khan would hang a tent rope from his neck while sitting in a tent for 3 days fasting. And his Mongolian people would be outside the tent all chanting Tengri, which means heaven. And then on the fourth day, Chinggis Khan dramatically emerged from the tent and he said, Tengri has given me victory. And then he announced 3 days of feasting before they went to war. So Juzjani does not like Chinggis Khan. He thinks he's a sort of sent from hell kind of person, a horror figure. But even he says that Chinggis Khan comes off as so smart and supernatural and so energetic that some people think demons are helping him, or he consults with the fairies, etc. Actually, like sort of demonic spirits and natural forces were sort of helping him. And what I think that indicates is that people did think he was larger than life, and sort of in his own lifetime, they couldn't believe this guy's ability and talent to conquer the world. So they thought it was actually demonic, and he was being helped by demons to achieve his goals, which I guess is kind of a compliment to the figure.
Uh, what was the role of Samuga, and how did he disappear?
Okay, so this is a really interesting story. There's a figure named Samuka, and he barely appears in any sources. But he, um, according to the maybe the earliest source we have on Genghis Khan, which is Li Xinchuan's Random Notes from Court and Country since the Jianyan years, which was written in 1216. According to this source, which has been totally neglected because it wasn't translated until a couple of years ago by Christopher Atwood, but it was sitting in classical Chinese, and not many people knew about it. But in this source, um, it details the very earliest years of Chinggis Khan's conquest when he left Mongolia and attacked China and the Jin dynasty in the north of China. And it describes the years about 1211 to 1216. And according to Li Xinchuan, the right hand man and highest official in Chinggis Khan's empire next to him was a guy called Samuka. And Li Xinchuan will actually say that Chinggis Khan will try to make peace with the Jin dynasty, and Samuka will just tell him, "No, no, I came here to conquer Beijing. I'm not stopping." And he'll just defy Chinggis Khan openly, and they'll argue, and Chinggis Khan will say, "You're like a dog that won't let go of a rabbit. Just let go and make peace." And Samuka will just go, "No, thanks. No, I'm going to just do my own thing here and attack Beijing." And indeed, Samuka conquered it. That's in other sources. So Li Xinchuan was writing about 1216. Some of his notes might go to 1217. And he said that the Tatar ruler, Genghis Khan, left his great chief, quote, great chief Samuka behind to besiege Beijing, as he personally went elsewhere and attacked other places. So this Samuka character, he calls him the great chief, our earliest source. Um, and here's another thing he says that's very strange involving the Samuka character, describing the conquest of Beijing, 1215, and afterwards, and the Mongol invasion. Li Xinchuan says, "It is true that the Tatars are only motivated by greed, and in the beginning had no far-reaching plans. After they sacked Hebei and Hedong, the wasteland stretched 1,000 li, so 300 miles, with all signs of habitation wiped out. Then they burned down the palaces of Beijing." And then he writes, "Their customs are crude and uncouth, without any distinction between lord and vassal. Samuka's residence even has golden ornaments and an imperial bedstead, and his footrest is a golden stool. His extravagance and presumptuousness are such as this, and his requisition and censors his tax never end. The people of Beijing suffer greatly under him." So not only is the Samuka character called the Great Chief and he disobeys Genghis Khan openly, but he dresses up as an emperor and lives in an imperial palace in Beijing. um, and elsewhere, Li Xinchuan in 1216 mentions that Genghis Khan has put Samuka in charge of the government of the whole area that's now the capital of China, and he manages it. Samuka manages it, and he is the so-called Grand Preceptor and Prince of State. So the question is, what happened to Samuka? Because the Prince of State position, as we know it in the official history, is occupied by a person named Mukali, who became Genghis Khan's right-hand man in China. And he did that position until 1223 when he died. Um, and he was officially appointed in that position according to his official biographies in 1217. So right around when Li Xinchuan stopped writing about Samuka, suddenly Mukali took over. So what happened to Samuka? He just vanishes from history. This guy who could actually defy Genghis Khan and was commanding the army, taking over the most important city that Genghis Khan ever took over in his career. That's now today still one of the great capitals of the world. And the Samuka guy was in charge of the whole thing. And yet he just kind of vanishes from history until you find him, a description of him by Rashid ad-Din, written in the late 1200s in Persia. And it's so bizarre that I have to, I think, uh, analyze it with you,
Yeah, please go ahead.
even though it's a little bit disgusting. But this is what Rashid ad-Din, who's the official historiographer of the Mongol Empire in the late 1200s, early 1300s, this is what he says about Samuka. Um, he's talking about Genghis Khan's early conquests against the Chinese, and he says at that time there was an officer from this clan, from the Seljuk clan, named Samuka. Although he was not a military leader, Genghis Khan gave him a troop several times and sent him on important missions. And you know, so end quote. So Rashid ad-Din seems to be downplaying that Samuka is not a great conqueror. And then he
Yeah, he was
casually mentions,
more
"Oh
more
yes,
of
well he
administrator than a military
exactly,
person.
yeah." He says he would send him on missions, and one time he went to the Altan Khan. That's the emperor of the Jin dynasty. The Mongols would call him the Golden Khan. Um, so he just goes. So he did besiege and take the most important city in China, but he was not a military commander. And he got a hold of all the possessions and treasures and officers of the Altan Khan. And other times he went on important missions. So this seems already dismissive, but so he's introduced Samuka and he said he's not even really a military commander, which is kind of ridiculous because Samuka seems to have achieved the greatest military, most strategically important military conquest of Genghis Khan's entire reign. and he was in charge. Samuka was running it. And then suddenly, Rashida Dean starts to talk about Samuka's private life, and I encountered this years ago, and I didn't even know who Samuka was. He just was one of these endless lists of generals, one of these figures, and I just thought this story was so weird, but I couldn't make sense of it. This is what Rashida Dean says, quote, Samuka was the one who used to get angry whenever the word goat was used. This was because when he was a child, he copulated with a goat. And of course, anyone who fornicates with a goat will be called one by the people, which we all know, if you
Yeah,
do these kind of things
it's like a negative
one time and you get caught.
propaganda. It sounds like a negative propaganda.
Exactly.
Like when you had the
It
split
was so strange to me.
between Stalin and his associates, he started removing them from official pictures. You had for years three, four guys, and one by one they disappeared physically and from the picture.
Brilliant, Sahib, because that was actually that was my punchline
Yeah,
that I was gonna bring up. That it looks like it's a case of
yeah.
classic
I mean,
unpersoning,
yeah. They
foulness
came with all
unpersoning.
kinds of gossips regarding Samuka that he
Right.
copulated
It looks like that this is just
with animals, or they would pull out all kinds of personal affairs in order to tarnish his reputation.
exactly. So actually, 50% of his biography or more is about this goat issue, and it makes him just look consistently like an idiot. Like he keeps getting mad at Chinggis Khan's adopted son, Shigi Kutaku, who keeps making fun of him for the goat incident. And then Kutaku goes, "Okay, we'll make peace. You never mention the goat again. I won't mention it." And then someone bribes Samuka to say the word goat, and he says it. And then Kutaku draws his sword on him and says, "You said you'd stop talking about the goat fornication." And when I first read this, I just thought, what? Why is Rashida Dean talking about such a absurd situation with this Samuka character? And then, so that's in the late 1200s, 1300s that this story about how shameful Samuka's life is and what a disgrace is, and that his clan got banned by Chinggis Khan. Quote, this clan was not left with any status from their relationship to Chinggis Khan, except that he ordered that their daughters not be sought or given in marriage because they were related to him, and in this way they were distinguished from other Mongol tribes, end quote. So Chinggis Khan almost seems to be trying to genetically destroy Samuka's lineage from that line. So
Yeah,
Samuka just disappears. But according to a guy who was there in China in 1216, Samuka was so important that he dressed up as an emperor, lived in the palace in Beijing, and openly disobeyed Chinggis Khan. And then suddenly he's gone, and there's this new guy, Mukali, and he's
yeah,
really obedient. He just says yes, sir, to everything, and
yeah.
that guy becomes the prince of the state. So there's an embarrassing secret in this whole story. And I told Jack Wilson, my antennae kind of went up, and I told Jack Wilson, I go, there's something going on with the Samuka guy. You got to check this out. And he goes, well, let me just check if he's in the secret history of the Mongols. Let's find out. And he goes,
Yeah.
no, he's not in there. They got him. That's what Jack Wilson said. They got him. Like I think Chinggis Khan had Samuka kind of.
Maybe he was a rival to his successors. This is the reason, because he was
It
so
looks like it.
powerful, and he controlled the most vital position in the state, that at the same time he was very powerful, and he was seen as a successor. But on the other hand, that situation created lots of enemies within the Mongol circles and within the power struggle, which occurred later on. So he fell as a victim of power struggle after after
Exactly.
I mean
And
during
but,
Genghis Khan's reign. I mean he didn't disappear after Genghis Khan's death, but even during his reign, he was punished for being maybe too competent, or for being a threat to other candidates. So he
I
was
wouldn't be
eliminated.
surprised if he got whacked by
Yeah, he was whacked
Genghis Khan
probably.
around.
Probably they whacked the whole clan. If we
Yep.
don't have if we
And
don't
it
have
goes to show
sources
you,
about him and his clan, it means they were all physically eliminated.
yes, that's what it looks like. And but it happened so early. It happened about a year or two after the conquest of Beijing, which is very early, 1215 in the whole story. And so you only get this little fragment of something very strange happened to this Samuka character. And why is he so important according to an eyewitness? And then he's a goat fornicator 85 years later. That's his great legacy to the world. So you can see dirty things kind of happening beneath the surface of everything in the Mongol Empire in these early days, and cover-ups, etc.
Yeah.
And I know in our own day and age, Saeed, that we're told not to believe in conspiracy theories, but of course conspiracies happen in politics. People get together and conspire against
Yeah, of course, because
another.
it's a high politics. We have conspiracies when people don't want to pay taxes if they run a private enterprise. If someone runs a small company, he's going to talk to his accountants, lawyers, in order to pay less taxes. And imagine if someone runs an empire like Mongol one or another kingdom or Tsardom, you're going to have all kinds of sceneries and all kinds of scenarios around people who are in charge. So it's not conspiracy theory. I mean, it's a conspiracy practice.
And from the secret history, which is another important primary source that tells a lot about Genghis Khan's life. It's in Mongolian, it's their own account. And it tells a lot of embarrassing detail, or you could say secrets, because it's the secret
Yeah,
history.
of course.
It will record that he killed his half brother when the family was sort of out starving, uh, raised by a single mother, Hogalan, and Genghis Khan and his full brother decide to kill their half brother, who's sort of bullying them, and that apparently his mother was furious about that. But whether it's true or not, that's a kind of shameful thing to record. It records as well about Genghis Khan's childhood. It has his father dropping him off with another family and to work for them. And Genghis Khan's father tells the head of that household, he goes, "My son's afraid of dogs." And I'm not sure what it means, but it could just be that he was literally afraid of dogs, and that was remembered and recorded in the secret history. But it does record a lot of secrets. And one of the things is that you see once or twice that when Genghis Khan has a rival in his early rise to power, be it his friend, his blood brother, Jamuka, or be it his mentor and shaman, Teb Tangri, he kills both of them. And he kills his actual boss, Wong Khan of the Kariad people. So anyone who's sort of a threat to Genghis Khan gets eliminated sooner or later, according to the Mongolians' own history. He can work with someone, and then if they kind of start to clash with him, he just
Of
has
course.
them eliminated.
Usually, you're going to clash with people with whom you work for many years. I mean, it's not the ideal scenario, but it happens. You're not going to collide with someone that you don't know or who is a total stranger. Normally, you collide with someone who's your coworker or who has the interest to undermine your position and vice versa. So,
Exactly. Yeah.
what was the transition after the death of Genghis Khan? Of course, it wasn't a peaceful transition, and there were many rivals who fought for the title of the Great Han.
Yeah. So Genghis Khan died in 1227, and his third son, out of the four official uh, sons of Berta, his first wife, um, and premier wife. So the third son was Ogadai. and he succeeds in 1229. I think it was September 1229. So it's not even early in the year. So the point I'm making is that more than 2 years, a little more than 2 years passed between Genghis Khan's death and Ogedai's succession, which goes to show you that there was maybe some jockeying for power and um, debates about who should be the Khan. Because part of the culture of the Mongols, and this could be kind of an East Asian general trend, is that the people who were offered to be the Khan, it was considered polite and respectable if you sort of refused the position. So the Mongol chieftains can offer the position to Ogadai, and he's supposed to say, if he's a well-mannered guy, he'll say, no, no, I'm not worthy of it. Choose someone else more worthy of it. And then the Mongol chieftains are supposed to pick up on this and go, no, no, we really want you to be our ruler. And he'll finally accept, I regretfully accept this position. And that was a type of modesty and way of demonstrating good character because they had enough guys who were, thought they were the best and wanted to be the alpha male of the whole group. They had enough people like that. So you really wanted a leader who wasn't like that and who demurred from the position. So Ogadai did a bit of that, but I think there were also questions about whether his eldest brother Jochi was dead, but there were still three brothers. There was Ogadai, who did take the throne, but then there was his Chagatai, and then there was Tolui, who was sort of a popular, charismatic war hero, the youngest brother, Tolui. So there may have been more uncertainty than we realized behind the scenes about who was going to actually take the throne.
What were crimes committed by Ogadai?
Oh, so the secret history goes until the end of the reign of Ogadai, the secret history of the Mongols. This very important document that captures their side of the story, and the book ends, if you can believe it, with Ogadai apologizing for all the bad things he's done.
Yeah,
Well, like he does a sort of Christopher Atwood did a translation of it of the secret history recently, and the very last chapter is called Ogadai Khan's final self-assessment. And he's sitting there and he goes, I sat on the throne of my Khan father, and this is what I've accomplished. I campaigned against the people of China and wiped out China's people. I set up postal stations, etc. In lands with no water, I had wells dug out. Also, I left outriders and permanent garrison soldiers over the city folk in every direction and made the nation live with their souls on the soil and their grip on the ground. So he basically he's saying I'm the guy who actually wiped out the Chinese Jin dynasty because that's true. He did it in 1234. He finally finished off the northern half of China and then immediately went to war with the southern half. But they finally took an empire in China. That the Jin dynasty fell. So he accomplished that, and he also set up this Yam postal station across the empire because it was getting so big that you really needed these postal stations set up to have any kind of functionality between the distant parts, like Russia, the borders of
of
Hungary,
course,
all the way to Korea.
to Asia or Far East.
And then he had these wells dug, and then he about the garrison soldiers. This is more, he's talking about more than just I put some garrisons of soldiers in cities. He's saying I set up an actual administration where this empire can function and run these foreign societies that aren't nomads. And we can actually have a lasting empire with a functional tax system and administration. So he goes, those are my four good deeds. And this is the very end of the book. He goes, but I also did some bad things. And one of them, I was defeated by grape wine. This was one of my errors. So he had a very worsening alcohol problem that was just getting out of control as his reign was going on. There's stories of him drunkenly ordering the equivalent of $1 million to be given to someone for a broken bow and arrow just when he's completely drunk and making sort of weird financial decisions that affect the whole empire and emotional decisions and sort of getting sick all the time as he's getting worse and people are trying to stop him. There's a story in one of these Chinese sources. It's not in English yet. I've never seen it in a secondary source, but Ogadai Khan's advisor Yelu Chucai tried to show him how bad alcohol is for you by pouring alcohol into a metal container, like a tea holder or something. And then he showed him the corrosion. He goes, "This is what it's doing to your insides." And Ogadai Khan said, "That's a great metaphor." But anyway, I'm going to keep on doing what I'm doing. So he behind the scenes, you have the empire shutting down under Ogadai Khan's descent into addiction. And then he says, my second error was that I ended up getting the women of Ochigan, my elder uncle's kingdom. And this is, I won't even go into the details, but there was a horrible kidnapping, mass kidnapping, and violation of the women in the kingdom of Ochigan, which was Genghis Khan's youngest brother. And I believe this was the origin of a huge war that would finally explode in the 1280s. It started with this, and this is why Mongol historiography in the later 1200s would say that the people east in the northeast of Mongolia were called Tatars rather than Mongols. I think this is all tied into this horrible uh, competition between Ochigan, the brother of Genghis Khan, and then Genghis Khan's sons like Ogadai and Tolui. And that was the real backdrop that formed this fake Mongol Tatar dichotomy that has bewildered scholars for the last 800 years. Why Mongols are also called Tatars, but apparently they're enemies, etc. And then Ogadai Khan, just to finish up his embarrassing secrets, he said that he killed a general, uh, Dokoku, who lost a battle against the Jin dynasty in 1230. And Chinggis, it's all in the murky, hidden veils of what really happened and what our sources allow us to see. But Ogadai confesses that he had this guy waxed, just like Samuka a generation earlier, because he lost a battle. And you know what's interesting? So another great general, another Mongol general who lost a battle to the Jin dynasty at the same time as Dokoku was Subutai, the most famous Mongol general. So he could have been assassinated here too, but he wasn't. And he went on to, greatness. But he very much could have been caught up in this too because he lost a battle against the Jin dynasty around the same time, and he was fired for it for a time. Which I find is interesting because people often remember Subutai as this undefeated general who never lost a battle. In fact, he was fired for losing a battle and maybe almost got assassinated for it, like this other unfortunate character. And then Ogadai confesses that he greedily put fences and walls up around land and offended all his relatives by doing this. He goes, I shouldn't have done that. I should have listened to them. This was an error. And that's the end of the book. That's the end of the secret history, him confessing that. And I think to Mongols, it would have been quite shocking that a Khan, a son of Genghis Khan, put fences and walls up. That's kind of the opposite of what a nomad is supposed to do on the open steppes of Mongolia. You're supposed to let things run wild and free to a point. And so apparently he offended all his relatives with his fences and walls. But so that in the secret history, that's what comes through. But Rashid ad-Din reveals an even more terrible thing. Ogadai's family killed Genghis Khan's most beloved daughter, and that doesn't get out in any other source except Rashid ad-Din. And he very secretively slips it into the book by quoting a letter by a Mongol prince, a Chinggisid prince. So he's like, well, this is his words, not mine. But I think it was Rashid ad-Din's way of trying to make sure that the truth about that story got into posterity, was passed down.
I'm going to send you another link because this session is close to the end, and we'll continue. We still have two more questions.
Okay, thanks.
See you in a while. So, what was the cover up of Monkey Khan's death? Because we have different accounts, whether he was poisoned, killed in a battle by a crossbow, or he died of cholera or some other pandemic.
This is one of the great mysteries of the Mongol Empire, and it's more important than it's been given credit for so far because Mancha Khan's death is he's the fourth successor or the third successor of Genghis Khan, so he's the fourth great Khan, and he was the last because when he died in 1259, the empire broke apart into civil war, multiple civil wars all across Eurasia, right through the 1260s, just Mongols destroying each other. So the consequences of Mancha Khan's death were huge, and that's why I'm so interested in it. There's something very haunting about the story because you know that again you're dealing with cover-ups, you're dealing with government control of information 800 years ago almost, but um, but the truth is out there. Something did happen, and so I've been I wrote a paper about this question of Mancha Khan's death in 2017. I've been interested in this in a long for stories like he drowned in a boat, etc., or died of famine, as Jews Jani says. These aren't true, but the two most compelling possibilities because Mancha Khan died during a siege of some Chinese town, Biaoyucheng, in Sichuan, and so southwestern semi-tropical China, very humid, lots of infectious diseases, etc. And he was besieging this fortress town, and it was just going terribly for the Mongol side. And an epidemic broke out. There was bad weather, it's drought, or then suddenly just complete. And it was or storms when the Mongols were trying to attack the city. Their ladders are blowing down from some tropical storm. So it was completely going sideways for the Mongols. And in the midst of that, Mancha Khan on August 11th dies. And even his official records even make it mysterious. They don't tell you how he died. Um, but some of the Persian, like Rashid ad-Din again, he says that Mancha Khan died of an epidemic disease. Um, and it's anyone's guess what that disease is. I kind of lean towards cholera for a number of reasons, but it's not sure, and there's certain inconsistencies. And then the other account is that the other version of events, instead of the epidemic, is that he was struck by the crossbow, as you said.
Yeah,
And there's a personal motivation that I'd want to believe either of these two events. On one hand, I kind of want to believe the crossbow story is true because um, I like to argue, and this has been my whole raison d'etre in my academic life, is arguing that the fortifications of different societies really caused a lot of problems for the Mongols. And what better example could I have than the fact that a fortification in China destroyed the Mongol Empire when the Khan died at the
yeah,
foot of it? If you got hit by a big ballista, that would just be the perfect way for me to pat myself on the back and say, "See, I told you that these castles were important." I was talking about the European side of things, but look what happened in China. It ended the empire. So I would have liked to believe that story, but increasingly, and there's several Chinese sources. There's Bar Hebraeus, a Syriac writer living in the sort of Iraq, Eastern Turkey region, who in a monastery he reported it at the time it happened. So it's not. I can't totally rule it out, but here's why I might lean to the disease theory. even though it doesn't help my fortification argument as much. I think the disease theory might be true, and here's why. So I've been going over this problem for a decade or so, and then I found in a untranslated Chinese source, the Songxu, it says that Mongol prisoners were captured by the Chinese during that battle for Diaoyuchen. The Mongols lose and retreat with their dead Khan. And the Chinese captured some prisoners according to their own official records on September 2nd, 1259. September 2nd. And those prisoners told the Song, uh, who'd taken them prisoner, their army, they tell them Manka Khan is dead. And it shocks the Song army, the officials. They go, the Khan's dead? That was September 2nd, 1259. And Manka Khan died August 11th, according to his own official records, biographical details in the official records, August 11th, 1259. So if the Chinese on the battlements of Diaoyuchen, if they had shot a catapult or ballista and they saw it actually strike the Khan and kill him, it would have been August 11th, and they would have already known he was dead. So if it's recorded in their own official records, the Mongol opponents, the Song dynasty, are recording that they didn't know the Khan was dead for another 3+ weeks. That would say to me that they didn't see him get killed, and that would now I'm more leaning to the epidemic explanation because he was doing a very dangerous thing. Attacking a city in China in the tropics in the summer is a dangerous proposition before antibiotics, et cetera, before anti-malarial medications. So, I mean, there's two. He easily could have died during this misadventure in several different ways, but the fact that there is well documented in Chinese and Persian and even French sources that there's this epidemic devastating the Mongols, um, and I like to think it's related to the volcanic eruption of Samalas, the biggest eruption of the Common Era in late 1257. I think that the upshot, the post-volcanic syndrome, was causing famine, weather irregularities, and medieval ancient people always knew that epidemics don't follow far behind famine and bad weather. And I think there are epidemics just documented across the whole of Eurasia, starting in 1258, famine, epidemic. So I'm not sure what the disease was, but if there's an epidemic just wiping out the Mongol army in 1259 at the base of this fortress that they just can't take, they can't end this battle, then it wouldn't surprise me at all. Knowing what we know now about how devastating epidemics have been to armies in history, it wouldn't surprise me at all if that's what actually killed the Khan, and that would explain why the Song didn't immediately know he was dead.
So, what were the reasons for the Mongol civil war between different candidates after 1260?
Well, the number one reason is just what we mentioned, that
Yeah.
the great Khan who had the control, Tolui's eldest son, Manka Khan, unexpectedly died. His name meant eternal, the eternal, like Manka means eternal. So they were kind of hoping the guy was going to last for a while, but he unexpectedly died about 8 years into his reign. And suddenly it's an open forum for who's going to be the next great Khan. And Manka had this special destiny. The shamans, right from the time he was born, they predicted this he's going to be the next Genghis Khan. And then he unexpectedly, horrifically, from a Mongol point of view, dies at this fortress in Sichuan. And suddenly, two of his brothers both think, like one of them's the fourth brother and one of them's the sixth or something in descent from, in order of birth amongst Tului's sons. So neither one of them really has a better claim than the other. And these are, of course, the famous Kublai Khan, Marco Polo fame, and then his brother Eric Buka. And they both proclaim themselves Khan at the exact same moment. Um, and then so they go to war and fight a huge civil war. They end up destroying the Mongolian capital city of Karakorum in the course of this war. And then the Mongol side, the nomads who were mainly supporting Eric Boca, they end up starving. Their horses are dying from grass not growing. And so by 1264, they surrendered to Kublai Khan, who was based in China, which was more resilient. Um, the steppe is a harsher climate. So ultimately, Kublai won the war. But simultaneously, over on the other side of Western Asia, in the Caucasus region, Hulagu Khan goes to war with Berka of the Golden Horde because and I think so there's a whole ton of civil wars. Kaidu, the grandson of Chinggis Khan, ends up or of the son of Ogadai, ends up going to war with Kublai, or rather grandson, I believe. And but the point is that if all these civil wars happen, if all these different conflicts break out in 1260, more than just one, it's because fundamentally, maybe the deeper reason that the Mongol Empire broke apart in 1260 is because the sacred law of Chinggis Khan to avoid succession conflicts had been broken already in the 1240s, 1250s with Goya Khan and Manka Khan. They broke the sacred rule about how succession should happen. And Chinggis Khan came up with this rule because he wanted his empire to last forever and he didn't want his progeny, his descendants to fight.
Yeah,
So he was very clear. It's this simple. It's Ogadai's family and his son, no matter, and whoever he picks, that son, whoever he picks of his sons, and it's got to stay in Ogadai's branch forever. Because Chinggis Khan knew anything more complicated than that would lead to civil war. But ultimately, Ogadai takes power. It works that first time, and he picks his successor. He picks a guy named Shiraman from his own family lineage. Then Ogadai dies of his alcoholism in 1241, and Guya Khan and his mother, the widow, Toragene, decide, no, we're not going to follow Ogadai's pick of Shiraman. Guyuk's the eldest. We're just going to take the throne. So they take it and they kill Shiraman. Big surprise. They throw him in a river. And once that happens, and once they start killing Chinggis Khan's daughter, etc., now there's no more rules anymore.
yeah,
Everyone's just kind of thinking, well, if they're going to break all the rules and kill Chinggis Khan's daughter, it's like we don't have to respect these guys anymore. So when Guyuk takes power and dies after a year and a half, Tolui's son Manka Khan just decides I'm going to violently overthrow the Ogadaids and we're going to take over the whole throne, and the Tuluids will, under me, will rule because the Ogadaids broke the sacred oath of their promise. Anyway, they broke the contract when they killed Shiraman and when they killed Chinggis Khan's daughter. So we don't have to honor a contract with them anymore. So Manka Khan took over the throne, and all these princes were saying, you can't do this. It's Chinggis Khan's rules. You have to stay, it has to stay in the line of Ogadai. So Manka Khan just started killing all these princes, hundreds of them, rounded up, interrogated, executed. It was a purge. And when he was crowned, no one was allowed to talk at his enthronement. His brothers were prowling through the audience, just waiting for someone to say anything so they could arrest them. So it was a suppressive. So now Manka's done this. He's actually executing Chinggisid princes who criticize it and just wiping them out, purging them like a Stalinist purge. So when he dies, all bets are off in 1259. No one cares anymore. Like the whole the rules are just a farce at this point. Everyone's just saying, "Oh, what Chinggis Khan said this," and then they go, "Yeah, but you didn't. But he also said this, and you didn't. You didn't do it. So why do we have to follow these rules?" So it just was entropy, you could say, something bigger than Kublai's claim or or Monka Khan's plan. It was something about that fundamentally, and this is a great lesson for our own times, fundamentally trust in the system had been eroded, and no one really trusted the system to sort out succession anymore. So it became a dog eat dog, winner take all, zero sum game.
So this is how the collapse of the Mongol Empire started, because they lost
Yep, and
centrality of the
that's what
power.
Genghis was worried
They
about.
didn't have a central power capable of controlling all major territories.
Exactly. Yep. It was they were doing their best with the technology of the time. The postal system was one of the greatest creations of the Middle Ages. The way they could communicate, they managed to communicate using these postal relay horses, etc. But fundamentally, I just don't think it was manageable in the 1200s. Maybe it's never really manageable to have a state that big.
Yeah,
And then to have these princes, each with their own ambitions, with their own yes men and retinue, telling them they're the greatest, and they're bellicose by nature. They're brought up in warfare and sort of trained to hunt, etc. They're not like brought up to meekly accept the authority of others. So it was just a toxic recipe, and that really was the curse of the steppe for centuries. I mean, someone like Attila could make a great empire, but it's not going to last even 2, 3 generations. And I think Genghis Khan knew about this. If he didn't already know these stories from his own society, he would have learned them from the officials. The Chinese literati officials would have told him about what had happened to past steppe empires, and he must have been racking his brain thinking like, what can I do to create some kind of stability so that that old curse doesn't befall the Mongol Empire. But ultimately, it's kind of like that game Jenga with the
yeah,
the block of. It's sort of like each time uh, one or another ruler or his family was sort of breaking the yasa, the official law of
yeah.
Genghis Khan. They were taking like a block out of that tower,
Of course,
and
it will
as it built
crumble.
up,
Eventually, it will crumble. If you remove all
yeah,
blocks, you're not going to have the edifice. It will collapse.
right. Because if the Ogadaids, when they got overthrown by the Toluids, they were just shocked, and he said, "How could you do this? This was Genghis Khan's yasa." But the Toluids could reply and just say, "Yeah, but you also broke the
Broke
yasa."
the Yasa before, of course.
And so it was just accusations back and forth. It kind of reminds me of politics these days, where
Of course,
both sides are, you're the hypocrites. No, you're the hypocrites. And so that's what was happening in the 1250s. Right from the moment Monka Khan, he did purge and suppress everyone, but he was winning victories. He was conquering territories. He was demonstrating a lot of talent for the job. So he kind of held things in place. But when he unexpectedly died in 1259, that's when just all the tensions that were simmering between these different princely dynastic branches, they just exploded. And interestingly, this is why this would be such a great book to focus on these things, or article, but especially a book would be because these family tensions were right there from the start, like right from what Genghis Khan's children growing up, and you see how they morph and develop into even more toxic
of course,
interrelationships as it progresses. So I often think maybe that element of the story hasn't been quite done justice in the English language, as far as I know, like the the family dynamics of the whole thing and uh, just how they develop over the generations and finally lead to the ripping apart of the Mongol Empire.
thank you so much for today's conversation. I'm going to continue to follow up on your scholarly papers and books that you're preparing. And I think we're going to talk in a couple of weeks.
Excellent. I really look forward to it, and I can't wait to finally be able to talk about that book, that
Of
first
course.
book with you, second book. Yeah,
Yeah, we're going to talk about your monograph hopefully in a couple of weeks.
I really hope so.
All the best and good luck.
Okay, well, thank you. Bye.
Thank you so much. Bye.